I don't think, I mean, she says the Iranian people are happy about this, and I don't see how she could possibly be speaking for everybody.
When people are calling him a terrorist, though, what they're talking about is things like IEDs and ambushes for American troops during the occupation. And that is even more than in other situations, like one man's terrorist is another man's head of intelligence.
Essentially creating turmoil wherever they put their hands. It's like the reverse Midas touch. So,
well,
what good is it?
Right.
Let me see if I can create a cogent paradigm here.
I'd rather have a good example.
Is that we made this preemptive strike on intel that is even more dubious than the WMDs in the inciting of the Iraq War. And in World War V, you shall have my sword, and then the elf said, you shall have my bow, and the dwarf said, you shall have my axe. Is that right?
Yeah, but that was probably that was at least World War III in Tolkien's universe, so it might be World War V.
That was Final Fantasy IV. While her perspective doesn't represent everybody in Iran, it represents some people.
Yeah.
Like a good chunk of people.
And specifically, Soleimani gave the United States a whole bunch of intelligence on Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda. He was a huge resource for us right up until the moment that George Bush declared Iran part of the axis of evil, and then things sort of soured for that.
I get the impression that a lot of the people of these countries see our military presence there as a big target on their backs. Welcome to another Kitchen Sink Microscopy. I'm Casey Rochford, and why don't you go ahead and like and share this video, because I'll just tell you up front, it's awesome, and you can take my word for it. And then subscribe to the channel.
And I'm Eric Rosenblatt, and don't forget, we write our own music, so stick around to the end of the show to hear something new that we've written.
Ooh.
Yeah, and if you really like it, the sample that we provide, you can go to patreon.com/KSMvidcast and pick it up. And so in this particular episode, this is kind of a rather timely thing. We're joined once again by Powers Chandler to talk about Iran and World War III.
Hooray!
Yeah. You've kind of become our resident historical consultant. Yeah,
I'm honored, although sad to be presiding over talking about historical and foreign policy stuff in this current climate. But
yeah, well, history in the making.
Yeah. So what do you think about the situation right now as far as Iran is concerned?
I mean, that's a big ass question.
Well, we should probably narrow it down. I think, Casey, you had a video.
Yeah, there was a recent video that came out. It's gone viral a week or two ago. It's an Iranian American woman that is talking about how the media is distorting things, and the assassination of General Soleimani is actually seen as a positive thing by all Iranians, and they all thank Mr. Trump. And I just wanted to maybe we could like refresh ourselves on this video, and then kind of talk about some of the points that she brings up, and I don't know, give our critiques and see what we agree and disagree with on it. So
that's a good place to start for like one aspect of this gigantic cluster.
Yeah, and it's like a 5-minute video, so it's pretty digestible.
All right, let's dive into it.
All right.
For those of you who don't know me, my name is Sagar, also known as Erica for my American friends who can't say Sagar. I am Iranian American. I have spent the last 12 years of my life as a human rights activist working on Iran policy, watching the Middle East. Yeah, it's a super complex issue. And many of you probably before today had never ever heard of the name Mohandes or Soleimani, but I feel like we're living in the twilight zone, guys. I'm completely outraged at this notion that the propaganda machine that is the media is glorifying Qasem Soleimani. Do you people know that this man has not only the blood of Americans on his hands, but the blood of Iranians, Iraqis, Yemenis, Afghanis? I mean, since when did we start mourning the death of a terrorist? I mean, seriously, I've had like friends on the left, both Iranian and American, attack me for echoing the rhetoric of my people. The people in Iran are happy. The people in Iran are happy that this man who was responsible for the slaughter of so many people is gone. Like, where was your outrage last month when the regime slaughtered 1,600 kids for peaceful protests? Where's your outrage for the thousands of political prisoners that are in Iran right now? Where was your outrage when the Hashtashabi took over the American embassy and like vandalized it and killed an American contractor? Like, I don't understand. So I'm sorry if I'm ranting, but who cares? My opinion doesn't really matter. But for the, in the interest of those that have reached out, here's the deal. I'm an Iran watcher. I'm an Iraq watcher. I'm a Syria watcher. I'm an Afghanistan watcher. And for the people on the ground, they don't hate America. They don't hate Donald Trump. In fact, there's a lot of trending hashtags right now from Iran on Twitter. Thank you, Trump. We thank you. Thank you for, Soleimani. Thank you. Go look for yourselves. And, honestly, guys, if you don't know anything about the Middle East, please keep your opinions to yourself. I beg you, because all you're doing is you're distorting the flow of information. You're drowning out the sound that's coming out from the ground. And people in Iran are happy. And they are giving out, in the Middle East, it's cultural practice to, when something wonderful happens, when there's a marriage or when there's a celebration, you give out cookies, you make cakes. And you should see the videos that are coming out. People are baking cakes. People are giving out cookies in public, in the streets, because they're happy. I mean, I don't know. Do we live in a closed society that we don't know that most people in the Middle East are not free? Specifically in Iran, it's an Islamic state. There's no freedom of religion. There's no freedom of speech. There's no freedom of peaceful, protest. And for anyone who disagrees with the regime, they're arrested, they're jailed, they're tortured, and yeah, there's a lot of video coming out right now about, the funeral of Qasem Soleimani. It's so much propaganda, you guys. The regime has been saying death to America for 40 years. They forced us in school to say death to America. I was 7 years old. I didn't know what I was saying. And the people that are like saying that right now, they're called the Basiji. They're like, they're getting paid. They're the ones that get paid to kill people on the street. So yeah, they're going to say death to America, but that's not the people. The majority of the people in the Middle East don't hate America. They don't hate Donald Trump. And I'm probably going to lose a lot of friends for saying this, but thank you, Mr. Trump, for making a very hard decision and for having the moral courage to do something that probably a lot of world leaders wouldn't have had. anyway, that's my 2 cents. I love you guys. If you want to have a conversation, let's engage. Let's not attack. It's not healthy. And hashtag everybody calm down. There's no World War III coming, okay? God is in control, not man.
Did she just say no World War III is coming? God is in control, not man. Was that the last thing
Yeah.
she said?
Yeah,
I think so. Yeah.
Okay, just making sure I heard that right.
yeah, and yeah, I know there's a lot to cover there, so
It's a huge thing to unpack, actually.
Yeah. It was wide-reaching.
yeah, I guess the first thing I want to point out is our philosophy on this show is not one that she shares. I think, I mean, at the end, she kind of said, let's have a conversation, but she prefaced that a minute before that by saying,
I was noticing that, yeah.
keep your opinions to yourself about the Middle East, if you don't know everything that's going on. Well, it's like nobody knows everything that's going on,
Yeah.
her included, I'm sure.
You could take it very charitably as if you don't know a lot about it, listen more than you talk.
Mhm.
But that it wasn't really the tone. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. I mean, there are the perspectives on what Iranians think, what Iranian Americans think. The concept of it being a brave international action, among many, many other things. But yeah, there's plenty of that I can't dispute. I can't say that Iranian Americans don't feel the way that she feels, but
Right.
there are other parts that I recoil at slightly.
Yeah, I mean, and there's certainly a lot of truth in there. Like it's not a very free nation by any means. There's definitely a whole lot of religious persecution in the Middle East in general.
That's true. In Iran, you actually see more political persecution nowadays, though.
Yeah.
Like if you see images of like people in burqas, that's not. People are generally substituting images from other countries in there.
Yeah.
But that is not to say that you're not in huge trouble if you do something that the government doesn't like and they notice.
Right. And I mean, maybe I'm in tune to this, but I happened to notice a small detail that she was wearing a cross necklace.
Yeah.
And so like it might mean a lot to her personally to have that religious freedom, and that's great.
Yeah.
I think that's a really important thing. Even though I'm an atheist and people probably think I hate everyone that believes in God. It's quite the contrary. Believe what you want to believe. And
absolutely, but it is important to take that detail into account when you're trying to figure out if she is speaking for the majority of Iranians or Iranian Americans who are not Christian, and how that might influence her perspective on it.
I don't think, I mean, she says the Iranian people are happy about this, and I don't see how she could possibly be speaking for everybody.
Yeah.
Certainly there is a proportion of the population that feels that way, and she's speaking for them, but this idea that it's all or nothing, it kind of rubs me the wrong way.
She's definitely claiming to speak for everyone, and that is the main issue, right? Like, because among the expat community, you're probably going to see significantly more people that are happy to see this guy gone, and that's not like, so you might think that like people inside the country, especially with Soleimani's involvement in like putting down protests, that they would be more upset, but it's generally the case that expats are on average more likely, expats from a repressive government are more likely to have a very negative view of that government rather than like a jingoistic view or nationalist view, because they left or their family left. They had a reason to leave. So even though that's totally legitimate, on average, you are going to see more negative sentiment toward the government from that group.
Sure,
I would. Even speaking for all of them is dubious.
Yeah, and I would say it's kind of like somebody who has been deeply immersed in a religious uh, upbringing or something like that, striking out against it. There, there, there is a component of that seems legit, but I have a yeah. It there's no way she could be speaking for everybody.
No.
And she talks about propaganda, and certainly in Iran, there's definitely a lot of propaganda.
Yeah.
Well, in her defense, I will say that, linguistically, pretty much anytime somebody says, like, oh, everything sucks, they mean like most things suck.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's kind of a given that we're
It's
not
an understood
all-knowing
hyperbole.
beings, and so
Yeah, that's absolutely true. But she did sort of press the issue of seeming to make it more clear that she was trying to speak for everyone, as far as like that she was pretty explicit about like, this is the way that these people feel. Shut up and sit down if you don't know about it.
yeah.
But I mean, again, that like it's an interesting video, partly because of everything that it covers, and partly because it seems to be so like shared so much. So it's important, but it is hard unless we want to like really take apart everything she said, in detail. I mean, her opinion, generally speaking, is just as legitimate as any other Iranian expats, and therefore, from that perspective, more valid than ours about the same thing.
Oh, for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there was one other thing that kind of got me a little bit, and I guess before I could talk about that, first thing I want to say is I imagine this Soleimani guy is just a polarizing figure, much like Donald Trump is here in America. There's absolutely a lot of people that would be upset if Donald Trump got hit by a missile. And there would also be a lot of people like kind of dancing in the streets and stuff. But it's like, what is the media in Iran or the media in Canada? How are they all going to portray it? It's all going to be a little different, sure.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because I've seen some of the videos of people mourning Soleimani's death, and yeah, there's a lot of people, but why are they there? Are they there because they felt compelled, or they were actually sad, or
are they there in protest?
Yeah, maybe. And what proportion of the population do they actually represent?
Mhm.
So I think having a better picture of what's going on is really important to gain perspective in this
Yeah,
situation.
Absolutely. I got a little bit of perspective on that before we recorded this. Just that the Iranian expats that I know personally, they sort of reinforced to me how, without it being like people that are paid or people that are like forced out into the streets to do this mourning, it's more of a subtle coercion, but very much there is a coercive element to, if you don't go out and do that, someone takes notice.
uh-huh.
Yeah, actually, that goes back to or North Korea, and some of their sorts of things that they do.
Mhm.
So it's like you have to take with a grain of salt all these people, and does it really represent their actual sentiments, or are they doing it because they feel socially compelled to do that?
Right.
Yeah.
Because looking at it from a Western perspective, whatever Western means, it's hard to understand what it's like to be in a world like that.
Yeah,
So,
especially for our generation.
yeah.
I think you may have had something closer during, like, maybe the McCarthy era might have been sort of
yeah.
closer to our taste of that, and you had stuff like that throughout the Cold War and before. But yeah, our generation doesn't have as much of it. Yeah, I would agree. It's harder for us to understand. We'd be drawing insufficient parallels.
Yeah, and so going back, like I wrote down a few notes while I was watching this. one of the things that really struck me was the whole like death to America thing. And I recently read an article kind of explaining the Persian or Iranian, excuse me,
Farsi, I think. Are you talking about the linguistic element?
Their perspective of what that actually means.
Yeah.
And, you know, we've discussed this before. In Iran, the people see the state and the people as two very distinct entities. And in the US, we have trouble wrapping our heads around that. Like we think, well, we're it's one and the same, like the United States, we're Americans, all this stuff. And I think it's different there. And this particular article, if I can find it, I'll send it to Casey so we can link it in the description. But it was kind of like outlining that when they say death to America, they're not talking about the citizens of America, the general population. They're talking about the state of America, the government, you know, the CIA and all these systems that have caused so much turmoil over there. They don't have any ill will towards the people, which this video also kind of covered to some extent too. That like people in Iran don't have anything against the American people. They have something against the government. And
Yeah, I think that's understood. I think that kind of falls into the category of what I was talking about earlier, where, you know, when you say something in an inclusive manner, you aren't necessarily meaning that you think every single person falls into that category, you know?
no, that's true. But here's the thing. If everything that you see in the media shows people in Iran chanting death to America, well, it's going to drive up a bunch of people are going to get all like up in arms, like, oh, they're
if it's the only perspective you see, it is a powerful framing device that makes it hard to make a distinction between the Iranian government's position and the Iranian people's position. And also, why would you assume that they don't mean the American people from that, if that's all you're being shown?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So the one thing that kind of got me about something she said that's going on over here is that she was implying, well, maybe even a little more strongly than implying, that there are people over here mourning the death of Soleimani.
Yeah, that one, I don't know who she's talking about.
Right.
I've seen a lot heavily criticizing the United States for having assassinated him. I've also seen people who object to the term assassination at all because of his status as a terrorist or a terrible person. I'm going to keep it. If there were assassination plots against Hitler, it doesn't matter if the person's bad. It's called it. The word is assassination.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've also seen people that object to that word, but I've seen tons of people that are very upset about the U.S. doing that. Feel that it's fundamentally wrong for us to have like taken that step in another country and toward just an individual leader of another country.
Yeah, it's not.
I have yet to see anyone talking about him being a great guy.
Right. That's what I was going to say. Like, it doesn't mean we think he wasn't a bad guy and that he didn't do bad things. It's just that there's a certain process that you have to go through to do something like that. And I don't think we quite covered that.
Yeah.
And I think that's what people are actually upset about, is that we made this preemptive strike on intel that is even more dubious than the WMDs in the inciting of the Iraq War.
And it wasn't covered enough, but like the first thing that I thought, and like the first thing that I responded to someone who asked me after that happened, like what I thought about it was like, you know, I'm still gathering information. This is very sudden. I'm not sure, but I haven't seen anybody talking about what Iraq's going to respond to this with. And then, you know, a couple days later, Iraq has the non-binding vote to ask American forces to leave, which by the way, that's non-binding because that's not the way the diplomatic channels work, not because they didn't want to like officially do that. Like the Iraqi parliament couldn't have officially done that. But yeah, I don't think that's being talked enough about at all. Not only, it's not just that we like exerted this power in another sovereign nation, it was a third party. That's a big deal. That's think about like Russia assassinating dissidents in London with the radiation tipped umbrella.
Yeah. Ooh.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And how big a deal we all felt that was, that they were going after that person on British soil.
Yeah, and the thing is, this has been going on for a long time, and it's not the CIA that's the only party involved in this. I mean, there many countries throughout the world have been doing the same kind of thing, like
Yeah.
interfering with the politics and the operation of governments in different countries for their own benefit. And Iran is no stranger to that. In fact,
Absolutely
I think
not. Yeah.
the current situation as it exists today is the product of the US's own intervention, if you can call it that.
Yeah.
That sort of territory. So, now we're fixing it. Well, we created it.
Also, let me clarify my position when I'm talking about how big a deal it was that we did this on a third party's territory. I don't mean from a moral perspective, because like you mentioned, Iran is absolutely no stranger to using proxies to, where we talked about this a lot in the previous episode, to using proxies to get what it wants. Many countries do that.
Yeah.
Well, my immediate thought after that happened and we used a drone strike for it was like, why do we even have the CIA? Aren't we supposed to, isn't that the point of having this shadowy organization for deniability in assassinating a figure on a third party's territory?
Yeah.
we just came in screaming from the sky, and we're incredibly open about it, and that's part of what shocked me so much.
It's interesting, like you said, why do we even have the CIA? Yeah, their track record is essentially creating turmoil wherever they put their hands. It's like the reverse Midas touch. So
well,
what good is it,
Right.
let me see if I can create a cogent paradigm here.
I'd rather have a good example.
God damn it.
I imagine you have a kid and you invite your neighbor over to babysit or whatever, and you go out for dinner and then you come back and you're just sitting around chit-chatting with your neighbor, and they haven't gone home yet and it's getting kind of late, and then your kid starts yanking the tail of the family dog, and your neighbor goes over and smacks your kid. I think that America is that asshole neighbor that's overstaying his welcome.
Yeah. I mean,
I see it.
Soleimani's the little kid pulling the tail, and
Right. Yeah.
Well,
followed
it's really easy to look at things in the now perspective, but we have to look back in time, like what led up to these kinds of things. Like, how did it get to this point? And what events caused, you got to look at cause and effect and all of the moving pieces on the chessboard. It didn't just happen in a vacuum. And the U.S. definitely was a player in that game.
Yeah. Well, it's also the cause and effect thing. It has a lot to do with the way that Iraq has responded with that, at least as far as that vote. So I don't know if you guys know the details of that vote.
Mm-hmm.
No, I don't.
Yeah,
Okay.
I've followed it quite closely, actually.
So just for Casey and the viewers, I guess, the Iraqi parliament voted, and pretty much the entire Sunni and Kurdish parts of the Iraqi parliament abstained from the vote, like didn't show up, and the Shia members of parliament voted unanimously to ask the United States to remove its military forces, again in a non-binding way, but that's because that's how that works from a parliament. It's not an official diplomatic. But so there is a bit of a question there, though, about like with the Sunni members of parliament, especially, did they so much boycott the vote because it was about, Iran, or were they really maybe not wanting to be put on the record at all about that? Because on the one hand, the Sunni members of parliament, they're representing people that had a minority rule that was incredibly repressive for decades over the Shia. But at the same time, the U.S. doing this with a drone strike in Baghdad is going to remind a lot of the Sunni population of the occupation and make it feel like this current, the U.S. forces stationed there currently is no different from the occupation, even though it's there under a completely different agreement. So I feel like a lot of the Sunni members of parliament would probably feel like they were between a big rock and a hard place about how to vote on that in the first place. And so more than boycotting, they may have just been like, I don't want to deal with this. But it was immediately very unpopular. But again, that's the cause and effect from previous actions that America has done. It's going to immediately remind the population of the very recent United States occupation and military forces throughout the region, and also really vindicate any Iraqis who were trying to say that the United States forces moving in for the anti-ISIS operations was just letting the beast back in. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, that's a complicated situation for them, for the other nations in the region, and it also. Oh, what was that other thing? Sorry. To go back to a thing about the video, if you guys don't mind.
Sure.
When she said, where was your outrage about an American embassy being attacked and an American contractor dying, was there not?
That's exactly what the strike was called, based upon, right?
Yeah. And I kind of feel like the media treated that as a pretty big deal at the time, too.
Yeah, and didn't you mention to me offline something about why it is that we haven't gone after this guy before?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So this guy, when they talk about it, when she says he is a terrorist, that's
Okay,
sure.
yeah, the whole like terrorist thing, like one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. Like it's all
but more than that, because what I mean here is that this isn't even like with insurgents in the Iraqi occupation being called terrorists. This guy is a military leader who is also in charge of special forces and intelligence operations and proxy groups. So first of all, Iran has absolutely engaged in terrorism over the years. Decades ago, Iran was involved in some terrorism in Western countries. Back when terrorism was like the big news thing in like the 70s, for instance, and the early 80s.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Since then, Iran's involvement in terrorism has generally been local to the region, and not really on our radar as like a big thing. When people are calling him a terrorist, though, what they're talking about is things like IEDs and ambushes for American troops during the occupation. And that is even more than in other situations, like one man's terrorist is another man's head of intelligence.
Yeah, well, I mean, if it's
for that part, it's kind of like the United States doing like arming the Taliban against the Soviet Union and Afghanistan. Like, does the Soviet Union get to be particularly angry with the guys in the military or CIA who organized that? Sure, but from like a diplomatic perspective, would you call them a terrorist? So it's complicated, but immediately calling him that it's
loaded
rot term. Yeah, it's loaded.
Yeah.
I definitely felt like she went into that with a very strong angle and some almost it felt like talking points, but
yeah. But you had mentioned to me something about
the intelligence sharing
with the intelligence about
okay so Iran at certain points in the 90s may or may not have funded certain Al Qaeda cells inside the Middle East, in a sense of they wanted to destabilize, like in their great game with Saudi Arabia, they wanted to destabilize certain Middle Eastern governments. They were not a supporter whatsoever of Al Qaeda's operations in Western countries. And in fact, after September 11th, they were very explicitly anti-Al Qaeda. Remember, Al Qaeda is a Sunni organization, a militant Sunni organization, and Iran is Shia. They are not friends. And specifically, Soleimani gave the United States a whole bunch of intelligence on Osama bin Laden and Al Qaeda. He was a huge resource for us right up until the moment that George Bush declared Iran part of the axis of evil, and then things sort of soured for that. But yeah, as far as like, because there was an attempt by the administration and Fox News to equate Soleimani, like link him to Al Qaeda, and that's just absurd. For all the things that he has been responsible for that could arguably be called terrorism, and all of the lives and innocent lives that he has definitely taken, Al Qaeda.
Yeah,
He's an enemy of Al Qaeda. He tried to help us with Al Qaeda.
And that's the whole thing. Like, I think people, it's the whole like, there's either good guys or bad guys. You're for us or you're against us. Like, I think it doesn't work out that way. It's
no, and this is an attempt to say that there's apparently an attempt to say there's only one group of bad guys too. Not just there's good guys and bad guys, but they all live in the same house as roommates.
Yeah. But that's for the news, you know. If you want to drum up support and whip people up into a frenzy of, beat the drums of war, and that's how you do it.
That's true. Although that one's an interesting one. I don't know if you guys watch Fox News.
Rarely.
I do, like pretty frequently. It seems to me to be an important thing to keep tabs on.
Yeah, I tune in from time to time. But
so the Fox is pretty. First of all, Fox has moved very much, even though they've sort of moved further right in some ways, but mostly they've moved Trump in the past couple of years rather than right or left. But there are big disagreements among the main Fox. What is the term that I'm looking for? The talk shows, the opinion division. So
right.
Fox has a news division and an opinion division. They don't tell people when you've switched from one to the other. So,
yeah.
But yeah, like Hannity and Tucker Carlson are opinion, and Chris Wallace is news. And so anytime that people say like, oh my God, and Fox said this, well, that must mean, no, that's Fox's news division. They are actually mostly about news. They have a bent, but it's not like the Fox opinion division. Yeah. But Fox's opinion division, all of their major personalities have been very split on this. Tucker Carlson has been actively talking about how this is just an attempt to bang the drums and get us into war, and it's always, the elites dragging us places. And he's gone very populist in recent years. Now, you listen to him for like 20 minutes and then realize that he's also talking about the need for the white race to maintain itself through militancy, in a sense. So he's still a creep. But
yeah.
The point is, you've got a bunch of old Fox personalities that are very jingoistic and sort of John Bolton level, like, let's go after Iran, let's bring democracy to the Middle East through force. But about a third of their major personalities are actively against that. So I don't know how to judge their editorial bent as far as conflict with Iran and trying to bang up the drums toward war.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I got off on a tangent there, but
no,
sure
I think that's actually really important. Yeah.
Yeah. I was just talking to somebody about this today or yesterday. They were talking about how, even CNN has a big bend in one direction. I was like, are you talking about the editorial version? The shows that are just people speaking their minds and their opinions, or are you talking about the actual reporting of the news? Because when I watch it, I always have an ear for critical thinking and stuff like that. So I'm always applying a little bit of skepticism to what I hear, and CNN's a fairly straight shooter.
Yeah.
You know?
Their opinion division definitely has a clear bent, but when people try to equate them, like I've got to try to remind people that when we marched into Iraq and the statue of Saddam was being torn down, Fox News actively and knowingly used footage of the Iranian Revolution to claim that there were giant crowds cheering it, when in fact the streets were empty because everyone was goddamn afraid.
Wow.
Which wasn't to suggest that the people were all against the U.S., intervention. They're afraid, though. For whatever reason, they're not coming out. And Fox had no problem actively lying about that. And that's not something that I've seen other news organizations do on that level about major events.
Mm-hmm.
But,
I think it's actually pretty common with major news networks because, they have bills to pay.
Yeah.
So...
they bend and frame all the time, but there are different levels.
It's usually more sleight of hand than that, though.
Yeah.
It's like choosing what to report on, and choosing the words that they use carefully and stuff like that. And, it's like, okay, yeah, that's kind of human nature. You can't really get past that.
Well, it's kind of like how to lie with statistics.
Yes, exactly.
You can speak the truth, but it can bend to whatever angle you're trying to sell somebody on, depending on how you feed it to them.
Right.
So going back to the beginning of this, actually, what do you think, Powers? Are we in for World War III?
Not at the moment. We've got a bunch of different flashpoints. So if we're in for World War III, quote unquote, World War III, there are a lot of different places it could come from. Right now, actually, the Iran situation has cooled down a little bit. And part of the reason is, again, similar to the way that the Pakistan-India conflict fairly recently worked out. It's sort of a need to show strength and not backing down while also not giving the opponent a good reason to escalate further. So, Iran's, they variably describe them as rocket and missile attacks. The first one, at least, was both on U.S. bases. That was pretty soon after Soleimani was assassinated.
Mm-hmm.
So, first of all, rockets are probably coming from Iranian proxies. Little groups, militia groups in Iraq. Missiles, Iran has a big stockpile of cruise missiles and surface-to-surface ballistic missiles.
Oh, and
they could have done whatever. They could have leveled these bases really, really, really easily. And it seems like...
Actually, I kind of want to address that. The fact that it seems to me like, looking as an outsider, like you said, they could have totally leveled these bases. Iran has a massive amount of missiles and rockets and capability to destroy almost anything. And they kind of almost made it obvious they were going to attack, and then did, and it was superficial damage. And then, they could sell it to their own internal media, like, oh, we killed a bunch of Americans, we did a bunch of damage, and yay, Iran.
That's precisely what I was saying, yeah.
Yeah, and
I don't think they sold it to their own people as killing a bunch of Americans, though. I don't think to my knowledge, they didn't lie to their people about having killed a bunch of Americans, but they showed... I
saw an article about that, but, I
could be wrong. I just hadn't heard it.
Yeah. But I wouldn't put it past them because, they have their face to save. As does everybody, actually, at that point.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a shot across the bow or whatever, so.
Yeah, but I kind of like the fact that it was sort of a nice little play, that nobody was harmed and war was averted.
Yeah, I am glad how that ended up going, and I was pleasantly surprised that Trump did not escalate.
Yeah, and it was notable that not just Trump, but the other people in the Trump administration, speaking on the condition of anonymity, said that a lot of people in the administration had, I believe, correctly interpreted that response as intentionally showing that they could have hit the bases hard and didn't.
Yeah.
So it is, I think the term that people generally use is an off-ramp to the tensions here. So that's going to keep being an area of tension, and there could be a flare-up at any time. But as far as us barreling toward war, no, not right now. That'll just keep being a concern for the foreseeable future.
Well, and it has been in the Middle East for a long time. It is a place of turmoil, unfortunately, because there's some pretty awesome people there. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, big picture, like the Middle East in general, what are we still doing there exactly?
Yeah, there are a couple things there. So one, the U.S. forces in Iraq right now are not connected directly to the previous occupation. They are under the auspices of a military agreement to help defeat the Islamic State of Iraq and Levant, or Iraq and Syria, ISIS. And there was a moment where it really did look like Iraq was going to fall completely. Just total surrender. The Iraqi military just disintegrated in a couple of the early sort of lightning engagements when they were fighting against ISIS. And then it turned out to be militias, and especially Iranian-backed militias, with U.S. air support and U.S. intelligence working together effectively along with the Kurds that pushed them back. But it was looking really dark for a little while. They got to the suburbs of Baghdad, and it didn't look like there was a good way to stop them from getting to the center. That is what the U.S. troops were doing there most recently. So that had a decent reason as far as comparing it to the other reasons that we have troops anywhere.
Right. It's somewhat humanitarian, I suppose. So.
Right. Or at least logical and without being Machiavellian.
Yeah, it's like a good chess move, if anything.
So for Saudi Arabia and just real quick, for Saudi Arabia and Kuwait and some of the other areas, we just consistently have military forces there. In I think James Mattis said it to Trump before he resigned. What we're doing here is trying to prevent World War III, and a lot of the time that is not the thinking that goes into U.S. actions, but that is the thinking that goes into U.S. deployments around the world.
Wow. But, a lot, again, I keep coming back to this whole, a lot of the turmoil in these regions stems from U.S. involvement.
Absolutely.
Subterfuge. It's not like overt involvement every time, but, the CIA, they
didn't say we were doing it competently.
Yeah. And so we create this problem, and then we go and fix the problem. And then people die.
Yeah.
I have a problem with that.
Well, and I get the impression, I don't know this to be a fact or anything, but I get the impression that a lot of the people of these countries see our military presence there as a big target on their backs. Like, hey, you're drawing some unfavorable military attention from our enemies, and from militias and resistance and all these things, like congealing on their homes, and it's all because we're just there.
That's a really important point, Casey, that has come up a lot, but very differently in different regions at different times. Because you've got like Western Germany in the Cold War feeling like the U.S. forces were the only thing preventing the Warsaw Pact from rolling over the border. And then you've got like South Korea at different points feeling like the U.S. forces there and the nuclear umbrella at South Korea and Japan feeling like that was vital to defend them from not actually North Korea so much for Japan until the nuclear issue, but China, a bunch of the nations there. But as different throughout different decades, that opinion has gone back and forth depending on the country. People feeling like they desperately need the U.S. protection that is there, and also the nuclear umbrella, or feeling depending on what's there and the sentiment, feeling like they are being made a target, like you said. England, for instance, really, really not a big fan of having U.S. Missile early warning placed in England. They felt like it was making England more of a target. They would have been a giant target anyway, but they felt like it was making England more of a target, and they were like, it was giving the United States 10 minutes warning before Soviet missiles crested over. The English public was asking oh, well, what does it do for us? And the Prime Minister was like, oh, well, we benefit too. It'll give us 2 minutes. So, and then you had missile deployment in Turkey before the Cuban Missile Crisis, and alternate opinions about whether or not that made Turkey a bigger target than it was already, as the NATO member in Russia's underbelly, or whether that was desperately important to have so that Russia never, ever attempted a quick strike on Turkey to fix that security problem. Huh. Anyway, sorry, just what you brought up is really interesting and changes a lot all over the globe, depending on where and depending on when, sometimes decade to decade.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I admittedly don't have a whole lot of knowledge of international.
No, it was an insightful comment, though.
Oh, that's good. But I had no idea about the England thing. That's not even on my radar. I can just imagine living there and getting an answer like that. You're like, 2 minutes, that's barely time to finish me crumpet, isn't it?
Pretty much. Yeah. I saw one English comedian talk about it as all right, well, that might just be enough time to rub one out.
Wow. So was there anything else in the video that jumped out at you?
No. So originally, when I first saw the video, I hadn't caught any mention, her actually saying that she was specifically an expat of Iran, rather than an American-born Iranian. But watching it this time, she definitely did. She talked about being in a classroom when she was a kid.
Right.
So that answered that question for me. I was just curious about that the first time that I watched it.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple ways that could go, though. I mean, there could have been a dual citizenship thing from birth.
Sure. But the question is just whether or not she actually had experienced it herself, and so whether or not she had dual citizenship is irrelevant to that. Right. It very much appears that she did experience the regime and the country's style as a small child.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, that experience is different than an adult being there, but it completely answered my question that I had missed the first time that I watched the video. Other than that, no, other than it kind of felt like there were some talking points going on rather than just, making a little video, but I have nothing to usefully add to that part.
Yeah.
Unless you guys have a different direction that you want to go right now.
Well,
I could. Sorry, go ahead.
I think it's important because while her perspective doesn't represent everybody in Iran, it represents some people.
Yeah.
A good chunk of people. And so we should be paying attention to that.
Absolutely.
Certainly, yeah.
Yeah. But her kind of angle was kind of the all or nothing thing, which I think is self-defeating because she should be a lot more. The whole idea that you're speaking for everybody, you're not. And if you talk about somebody in the United States, if I made a video like that as a United States citizen, saying oh, Americans love this thing that happened in this other country. Well, there's no way. There's 300 million plus people in this
Yeah.
country. I can't speak for all of them.
I feel
Yeah.
like one of the big point to keep in mind as we talk about this, though, is that what's important isn't whether or not she was on solid ground saying what she said, is whether or not we should take her opinion as gospel. And do you get what I mean by the difference between those things?
Well,
Yeah.
exactly, because I was just going to say, like, the trickle down effect from this going viral is that people just kind of take that at face value. And I had a friend on Facebook that posted this and added a little bit of sentiment that she is standing with the Iranian people and praising the death of this guy. And I got into a little bit of a conversation with her dad, and she happens to be dating a friend of mine that I've known for 25 plus years. And her dad and I got into some words, and
You don't say.
and then she blocked me, and I don't know if I'm going to hear from this friend anymore. So like these things are really heating people up,
Yeah.
you know?
Oh, kidding. I just meant that even though this woman's video is the focal point that we're looking at when talking about this, it's just like, because she's the only person appearing in the video and this video is the focal point, it feels like the grammar lends itself to criticizing her, but that's not the point. The point is not criticizing her for the video and her perspectives in it, is criticizing the perspectives themselves. That's all I meant. I was realizing that I was sort of falling into a
Right. No, that's a good point to make. We're not trying to like pile on to her or anything. And if I would probably have invited her onto the show if I had some way of contacting her anyway.
Yeah.
So,
no, yeah,
exactly.
It's just easy to fall into, and I realized I was, so I wanted to bring it up.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's important to note. Because most people in the U.S. have no idea where Iran is on a map. They don't understand the culture, the people.
Yeah.
And so they see this one video. This is all they have, except for the media. So they have those two things, and that is their perspective. And it goes deeper than that because, again, if you're talking about the United States, well, where in the United States? There's like thousands of different cultures here. And I'm sure there's a lot of different cultures there and different viewpoints and stuff.
Mhm.
And she represents one of them.
Yep.
And so, yeah, that's my 2 cents.
It's a
Nicely
good 2 cents.
done. Nicely done.
Well, so there is something that I think we probably don't have enough time left to talk about tonight, or at least I don't, but I really want to talk to you guys about at some point in the future, because you brought up, I'll deal with this part real quick. You brought up World War III, I think mostly as sort of like a throwaway or in slight jest, are we about to have World War III?
Yeah.
But this comes up a lot, and there is a lot to talk about that. Because like with Iran, there's no path right now that's immediately obvious that even if we went to war with Iran, it would constitute any sort of World War III.
Yeah,
it would
I
be
was
a
gonna say.
disaster. But
unless Russia got involved, because that would actually be a World War
that
III.
would exactly. But and the question is, why would Russia, and under what circumstances? Because Russia and Iran are they are friendly. Russia defends Iran in the Security Council most of the time, but you can't just think about like who's friends with who. You got to think about how much do they care.
And how much do you have to lose
Exactly.
going to war with another nation, especially the United States versus Russia? Like that is the end of the planet at that
And there
point.
was this.
And Russia is extremely aware of that.
Yeah.
Then there was this Iranian shooting down of Ukrainian airplane incident. And Ukraine and Russia are kind of intertwined in some ways politically, and
kind of in some ways, kind of at each other's throats, kind
right.
of.
Yeah, it's complicated.
But if you want to talk about World War III hotspots, the Baltics and Ukraine would be one, and North Korea would be the other one that would be like a third party that brought us into it, and then the South China Sea. as one that you could easily see a bunch of stupid mistakes and misunderstandings cascading. But Iran, not so much. That's not to say it couldn't. There's just no clear progression in like 2 steps to World War III.
So let me just interject here with a quote often attributed to Albert Einstein.
Mhm.
I know not with what weapons World War III will be fought, but World War IV will be fought with sticks and
Sticks
stones.
and stones.
Yep.
Yep.
Exactly. So
Yeah, it's a good one.
it's pretty awesome.
So talking about World War III, the ones that pop into my head are that and the World War II quote that hits me the most. And now I am become death, destroyer of worlds. Said by Robert Oppenheimer when he watched the atomic bomb go off.
Yeah, a quote from the Mahabharata. Yeah.
Yep.
Oh yeah. Nice.
Yeah, you combine those two and go into slight existential anxiety.
Yeah, exactly.
And then wasn't it somebody who said, and in World War V, you shall have my sword. And then the elf said, you shall have my bow. And the dwarf said, you shall have my axe. Is that right?
Yeah, but that was probably that was at least World War III in Tolkien's universe. So it might be World War V.
That was Final Fantasy IV.
But see, I do want to, since you guys like covering this kind of stuff, I would really like to talk to you guys at some point about things like people's fears about the draft, and specifically why that's not really a thing they have to worry about at any point soon, and not with Iran. And also World War III. I would love to actually have a discussion with you guys on that kind of stuff and the sort of anxiety that is gripping our generation, rightfully so, about these issues, and like sort of almost having like a collective meme psychological treatment for us spreading around. But
no, when 9/11 happened, I was 20 or something like that, and I was seriously like, whoa, what's going to happen here? Do I have to worry about getting drafted?
Right.
Yeah. Oh yeah,
I mean, that was like the first event in my life where there was actually like a true and present threat to our soil,
Yeah. Yeah, it is that's one of the only times that has actually like been made manifest throughout other much bigger wars against much bigger fish. There have been very, very few times that the United States soil itself was threatened in anywhere close to that which actually came to pass. Yeah.
Except maybe like the Pacific side of World War II.
Yeah, you had Alaska invaded, the Aleutian Islands invaded, and you had Japanese
Pearl Harbor.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, Pearl Harbor. Sorry, I was talking about like the at the time Hawaii wasn't a state yet, so technically.
Oh, that's true. But yeah, it was our base. So
Japan also floated. Speaking of Americans not knowing where Iran is, when Franklin Delano Roosevelt gave that speech, everyone had to pull out their atlases. This is an anecdote from people at the time, but they said that they had to pull out their atlases to figure out where Hawaii was. And then when they mentioned the Philippines, no one even bothered. But yeah, so Japan was also launching those paper bombs, the balloons that would carry across the wind really weirdly accurately, even though it didn't hit anything important.
Yeah.
Just to get it that far.
Move, like. By the way, okay, go ahead. Sorry,
what'd you say?
Genius move, by the way.
Oh yeah. Well, it's like idle hands. You want to do something you feel like is making some difference, even though it's not going to do anything worthwhile.
Well, yeah, and I've read The Art of War. Like, I enjoy the kinds of things that people dream up around that. And the way they embrace that kind of ideology. Yeah. Anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
No, that was it. I was just moving off of what you said about like the Pacific War and like the threats against American territory at that time. And like you also had, there was a plan for Japan to use the German atomic program had not panned out, and it was pretty clear it wasn't going to pan out, but they still had material. And there was an attempt to give some to Japan that Japan would then use as a dirty bomb in California. And
I'm not
an atomic
aware
bomb,
of that
but-
one. I'm aware of Operation Paperclip, where they brought all the smart people from Germany.
Oh yeah, the after the war bit, yeah.
Yeah.
Russia and the United States racing to capture as many Nazi scientists as you can find.
Oh, okay. Don't even get me started on that.
It sounds like we've just got a lot of topics that we could talk about at a later
Oh, yeah.
date. Have a lot to say.
So yeah, those are great topics. I'll put those on the list for future on the next exciting episode of Kitchen Sink Microscopy.
Please use that voice for every intro. But yeah, no, thank you for having me on. Great recording with you guys. We've got a lot of things that I would love to talk to you guys
Oh,
about.
that's good.
All right. Well, again, thanks for deep sink diving with us, and have a great night, everybody.
All right. Take care.